I never thought I'd become the target of our HOA president's wrath, but here we are. It all started 3 months ago when I moved into Sunnyside Estates, a picturesque suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and apparently the most power-hungry HOA president in the state. Karen Winters, a woman in her 50s with an immaculate blonde bob and perpetually pursed lips, had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist for 5 years. I'd heard rumors about her from the neighbors, but I figured they were exaggerating. They weren't. My first encounter with Karen happened exactly 1 week after I moved in. I was still unpacking boxes when there was a sharp, impatient knock at my door. When I opened it, I found a woman standing there with a clipboard, tapping her foot rapidly against my welcome mat. "Hello, I'm Karen Winters, president of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association," she said with a tone that suggested I should be impressed. I introduced myself and extended my hand, which she ignored. "Your garbage can is visible from the street," she continued. "According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines, all waste receptacles must be stored out of sight except on collection days." I apologized and explained I was still getting settled, promising to move it right away. She nodded curtly, made a note on her clipboard, and added, "And your grass is half an inch too high. You have 48 hours to remedy these violations before a formal notice is issued." She turned and walked away before I could respond. I moved the garbage can and mowed my lawn that day, thinking that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, Karen found something new to complain about almost daily. My garden hose wasn't properly coiled. The color of my new doormat wasn't on the approved list. My car was parked slightly crooked in my own driveway. Each time, she'd appear at my door with her clipboard and that same disapproving look, as if I was single-handedly destroying property values across the entire county. I remained polite but increasingly frustrated. My neighbors warned me that fighting back would only make things worse, as Karen was known to escalate conflicts and could make your life miserable if you crossed her. The situation took a turn when I decided to install a smart doorbell camera. I wasn't specifically targeting Karen. I travel occasionally for work and wanted the added security. The installation went smoothly, and I didn't think much of it until Karen showed up the very next day. "What is that?" she demanded, pointing at my new doorbell with an accusatory finger. I explained it was a security camera. "Those aren't approved by the architectural committee," she said with a smug smile. "You need to submit a formal request for any exterior modifications." I pulled out my phone and showed her the community guidelines I had thoroughly reviewed. Actually, Section 8 specifically states that security devices under a certain size don't require approval, and this falls well within those parameters. Her face flushed red. For possibly the first time in her HOA presidency, someone had actually read the guidelines and called her bluff. "Well, I'll have to verify that," she muttered before storming off. That's when the real trouble began. Karen started sending me violation notices for increasingly absurd infractions. My holiday decorations were put up 2 days before the officially sanctioned date. The birds visiting my bird feeder were too noisy. I wish I was making this up. At one point, she even claimed the scent of my weekend barbecue was creating a nuisance. I kept my cool, responding to each notice with a polite but firm explanation of why the supposed violation wasn't actually against any written rule. This approach only seemed to infuriate her more, but I refused to give her the emotional reaction she clearly wanted. Things escalated when I decided to attend an HOA meeting. I simply wanted to introduce myself to other neighbors and perhaps gain some insight into how decisions were made in our community. The moment I walked in, Karen's eyes locked onto me like a heat-seeking missile. When the meeting opened for general comments, I raised my hand and politely suggested creating a digital newsletter to keep residents informed about community events. "We've always done a paper newsletter," Karen interrupted sharply. "Digital communications are unreliable and exclude our older residents." Several elderly neighbors immediately spoke up, mentioning they'd actually prefer email updates to save paper. I could see Karen's knuckles turning white as she gripped her gavel. The meeting continued with a few other neighbors suddenly feeling emboldened to offer suggestions, and with each one, Karen's expression grew darker. The next morning, I left for work as usual. Everything seemed normal until I returned home that evening and found both of my passenger side tires completely flat. At first, I assumed I'd run over something, but upon closer inspection, I could clearly see clean, deliberate slices in the sidewalls. This wasn't accidental damage. Someone had intentionally slashed my tires. My first instinct was to call the police, but then I remembered my doorbell camera. I pulled up the app on my phone and scrolled through the day's recordings. And there she was, clear as day. At exactly 11:43 a.m., Karen Winters herself approached my car, looked around furtively, and then pulled something from her purse. The camera caught her bending down by my passenger side tires, and though the angle wasn't perfect, there was no mistaking what she was doing. She slashed both tires, straightened her jacket, and walked away with a satisfied smile. I was stunned. I had expected pettiness, maybe even some malicious compliance with HOA rules, but criminal property damage? That crossed a line I never thought she'd go near. I immediately called 911 and reported the incident. The responding officer reviewed the footage and took my statement, clearly surprised by the brazen nature of the crime. "We'll need to speak with Ms. Winters," he said, taking notes. "This is clear evidence of criminal property damage, and depending on the value of your tires, could be classified as a felony." I provided all the information they needed, including copies of the video footage and documentation of all our previous interactions. The next day, I was working from home when I heard a commotion outside. I looked out my window to see two police officers at Karen's front door. From my angle, I couldn't hear the conversation, but her body language told the whole story. Surprise, followed by indignation, and finally, panic. The officers spoke with her for several minutes before escorting her to their patrol car. She wasn't handcuffed, but she was clearly being taken to the station for further questioning. As they helped her into the back seat, her wide eyes met mine through my window. I didn't smile or wave. I simply watched as the reality of real-world consequences finally caught up with her. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By evening, my phone was buzzing with text messages from neighbors who had heard about Karen's arrest and wanted to share their own stories of her tyrannical behavior. Apparently, I wasn't the first resident she'd targeted, just the first with irrefutable video evidence. An emergency HOA board meeting was called for the following week to address the situation. In the meantime, Karen was released pending charges, but she was notably absent from her usual neighborhood patrol. My new tires were installed, and I submitted the receipt to the police for their case file. At the emergency meeting, attendance was higher than anyone could remember. The vice president of the board, a retired judge named Tom, called the meeting to order and addressed the situation directly. "As many of you know, our board president is currently facing criminal charges for property destruction," he said solemnly. "Regardless of the outcome of those proceedings, this behavior violates our own bylaws regarding conduct of board members." Karen sat in the back row, her normally perfect hair disheveled, her face tight with anger. When given the opportunity to speak, she claimed she was being framed and that my camera footage must have been doctored. The collective eye roll from the assembled neighbors was almost audible. The board voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position, effective immediately. As Tom announced the decision, Karen stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You can't do this to me," she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "I've given everything to this community. I've maintained property values. I've preserved our standards." Tom calmly reminded her that destroying private property wasn't part of the HOA's mandate. The meeting concluded with the announcement that elections for a new president would be held the following month. As people began to file out, Karen remained frozen in place, watching as her 5-year reign crumbled around her. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from the county prosecutor's office. They were charging Karen with criminal mischief and property damage, with a court date set for the following month. The letter also mentioned that based on the value of my tires, she was facing a possible fine of up to $5,000 and potential probation. That same afternoon, I spotted Karen loading boxes into her car outside her house. A neighbor later told me she had been placed on administrative leave from her job at a local real estate office after news of her arrest made it to her employer. As she struggled with a particularly heavy box, she looked up and saw me watching from across the street. For a moment, our eyes met, and I could see the exact instant when she realized that her perfect suburban life, the one she'd been so desperately trying to control and